The question is, how do you go so long without knowing that you're vitamin D deficient? Hey good people, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about my experience with finding out that I was deficient in vitamin D. So in the past, I've always had issues with my thyroid. Temporarily, I was on medication, Synthroid or levothyroxine, and I got off of that medication. My lab work came back and it was fine. And then after that, I had a spell where I was at work. I felt like someone just got the room and just picked it up and down and just shook it. And at first, I was like, is someone attacking this building? I noticed no one else was freaking out. So I quickly sat down and I got up about 2 or 3 times. And finally, I had to call my best friend and be like, hey, I need you to come up here. And I work in a hospital, so they took me to the emergency room. My blood pressure was super high, and I've never had blood pressure issues in the past. When I checked at home periodically or even at work, a high for me was, you know, anything around 120 to 125. That would be considered very high for me. So, you know, I went to the emergency room. All of my lab work came out fine as far as, you know, EKG. They put me on a drip and sent me on my way. I got to the doctor and she was just like, I just don't think it's hypertension because you've been coming since, you know, 2017. My blood pressure is always between 115, 120 over 75 or 80. So she was thinking, because I've had an issue with vertigo in the past, maybe that was it. So, you know, we did some of the exercises you would do for that. And then she gave me a sample for blood pressure medication. And she honestly did not want to give it to me, but because I have a history in my family of high blood pressure at a young age, and when I say young, I mean like 20s, 30s, I just couldn't ignore it. I mean, my father has had 2 strokes and a heart attack, so I knew I just could not leave out of there without something. I felt like it was some type of protection. But anywho, I started taking the blood pressure medication and it seemed like my hair was getting thinner and thinner. So I emailed my doctor and she was kind of adamant about that blood pressure medication does not cause hair loss. So I'm like, well, it has to be something. I was no longer on the Synthroid. So I started feeling like my heart racing all the time and just an overall feeling of being tired. I've always had like joint pain, but now I was having muscle aches. And this sometimes got looked over because I do have scoliosis. So I was used to having some type of discomfort in my joints, but not necessarily my muscles. So I emailed her back and say, hey, can we do some more lab work, but can we see my, can we pull blood work for my vitamin D? And she said yes. And the only reason why I said vitamin D is because I know from the past that can also cause hair loss or be the reason for hair loss. But I really didn't think too much of it. I just wanted to see how low I was. So we get the blood work back and my vitamin D comes back at 6. Normal range on the low end, I think, is around 20 or 30. So she prescribed me some vitamin D and I'll put the amount, but I know it was like 50,000 units, I believe. Something higher than you would get over the counter. So she told me to take that once a week and I'm still taking it. So this is where things get a little interesting. So the week after I found out that I was deficient in vitamin D, my son was complaining of knee pain. And so he had a routine appointment at his pediatrician anyway. So when I took him in, I said, hey, he's complaining of knee pain. Earlier this year, he was complaining of ankle pain. And because he was around 11 or 12, they said it's probably from growing pain. And I was like, okay. But he started complaining more and more and his gait began to change. So I asked, hey, the pediatrician first said, well, we'll do some more blood work, but I think it's just growing pains. And I said, okay, will you run blood work for vitamin D as well? She did. you know, the next day she calls and she says his vitamin D was very low. We're going to call in him a prescription for vitamin D, calcium, and refer him to an endocrinologist. And I was like, okay, so we're both vitamin D deficient. They call that endocrinologist's office, and right after I pick up his prescription, it's about 5 o'clock, she calls and says they want him to go to the emergency room immediately, to the pediatric emergency room. And I'm like, ooh. And they were just not satisfied with his blood work, and they wanted to send him to their ER to get the blood work drawn again. They did the blood work again in the emergency room, and it came out the same. His vitamin D did not even register, and so they immediately diagnosed him with Rickets due to malnutrition. Now, my son is a picky eater. I'm a picky eater as well. And I feel like we kind of get pushed into it a little bit just because we have fish allergies, seafood allergies, nut allergies. And when you go looking up things, vitamin D comes from that. That is a good source of vitamin D. So with him being a picky eater and he's already not getting that, that's what they diagnosed him with, and he ended up being put in ICU, pediatric ICU, for about 2 or 3 days, and then he was able to go to a regular room. They were really trying to figure out how long has he been deficient, and I really didn't know how long he had been deficient because he had never had his blood drawn for vitamin D. And then they started looking into my history. So you don't really hear much about Rickets anymore. And when you do, it's usually with infants and babies. And my son was 12 at the time. So when they said Rickets, you know, they did a full body x-ray just to make sure, or check the bones, because normally you see deformities in the ankles or the knees. And so I got to thinking when they asked me, is there a history of Rickets in your family? And I'm like, no. And then the doctor was like, so no one is like bow-legged? And I thought about it. I was like, I'm bow-legged. My mother is bow-legged. Her father is bow-legged. But I feel like in our culture, we don't look at bow legs as like, I feel like we don't look at bow legs as a deformity. We look at it as like something that makes someone even a little more attractive. I don't know, or maybe just in my small town. But if you bow-legged, it's like an extra plus, right? With the bow legs, you know, they was like, that is a symptom of Rickets. His x-rays thankfully came back normal, but they gave him vitamin D. And when they checked him, it was like they had given him nothing. Then they doubled the dose. Nothing. There was no improvement in his vitamin D. Because his vitamin D was so deficient, it started to pull calcium from his bones. And so the vitamin D and the calcium, they go hand in hand. So I'm just surprised that he did not have any broken bones before then. So they end up giving him a higher dose of a synthetic vitamin D, and that made his calcium levels improve. His calcium was well below what it needed to be. But because he was getting the vitamin D and pushing the calcium through the IV, they had to monitor his heart. It was very scary. And what's strange is it's just normal, I guess, to my son and to me to function at that level of deficiency. When I told him that, hey, you have to go to the ER, he was like, can I play my game first? So they released him as soon as his calcium got to where it needed to be, but he was discharged, still on vitamins. He still has to get lab work done every 4 weeks, and he's still going to the doctor every 6 weeks because they really have not diagnosed him yet. On paper and at glance, it just looks like malnutrition. But the fact that they were giving him so much vitamin D, his body was not converting the vitamin D. So they're looking at some type of form of him being vitamin D resistant. Because that happened with him, and I told the specialist, the endocrinologist, that I had just found out I was deficient in vitamin D. Now he wants me to see him as well. So even though I'm still taking the 50,000 units from my physician, I will be going to him. And when I'll get that lab work done to see if the 50 units, if it made a difference or if it, you know, didn't do anything. But I can say since taking the vitamin D, my hair on this side is improving. But is it because of that, or is it because I've just been leaving my hair alone? I don't know, but I will update you guys. The question is, how do you go so long without knowing that you're vitamin D deficient? Well, vitamin D, the symptoms of being deficient look so similar to other things, so it can go unnoticed. And another thing is, I'm Black. Like, not just Black, but like blackity black. So even though I am in the sun, because my skin tone is so dark, it does not absorb the vitamin D as someone lighter than me. Black people typically have a higher chance of being deficient in vitamin D. So now I'm trying to make more of an effort eating foods that have a high amount of vitamin D in it, and the same for my son. He's taking Pediasure. That has helped a lot. It takes about 2 or 3 of those a day. But yeah, it's just crazy how we are likely to be deficient in vitamin D, but it goes overlooked so often. So I hope this video was helpful, sharing my symptoms and just my experience with vitamin D. If you're going through something, similar symptoms, and you just can't put your finger on what it is and you have not had it checked, just don't be afraid to ask your doctor for certain labs to be done. I'll see you guys in the next video. As always, take care. Lights out.